So my name is Diane Dufour. I am the founding director of Le Bal in Paris, which is an exhibition space for photography, cinema, video, which was created almost 20 years ago.
I'm Yasufumi Nakamori, the director of Asia Society Museum in New York, and also vice president of arts and culture of Asia Society. I had the pleasure to get to know Mr. Ishimoto towards the end of his life while I was writing my doctoral dissertations. He was a very important part of my research and writing. So we're very happy that we both are here at the beautiful exhibition, the Bauhaus exhibition of Ishimoto.
Thank you, Yasufumi. We started the process of being interested in Ishimoto a long time ago at Le Bal because we did a few years ago the Provoke show, the Provoke Generation show, which was a very extensive survey of visual art in Japan from the mid-60s to the mid-70s. And many years later, I was really interested in how this generation, Fukase, Moriyama, Tomatsu, Nakahira, etc., came to light, and the bridge between the more let's say, traditional social realism generation, Kendamon, Amaya, and the Provoke. And there was a big gap, let's say, formally, but also in terms of attitude, in terms of considering history of photography. And suddenly I read again in the 1974 MoMA Museum catalog of an exhibition called New Japanese Photography, which was the first survey panorama of Japanese photography outside of Japan, made by Sarkovsky and Yamagishi, so an American and a Japanese curator at the time. And in the catalog, Yamagishi is introducing all these wonderful Japanese photographers from Ken Domon, Tomatsu, Fukase, Ken Ohara, Araki, and says, but don't forget that without Ishimoto, who brought from America to Japan the essentials of modernity, modern photography, this generation would not be the same. And so I was very intrigued because for me, Ishimoto was a very classical figure. And we can come back on this history afterwards.
Yes.
But so this was a trigger to go to Kochi, to the Kochi Museum of Art Museum, where all the collection and all the heritage of Ishimoto is available and is being preserved. And I started to be interested in the first decades of his work. That's how everything started.
Well, Ishimoto came back from Chicago in 1953.
Yes.
Soon after his training of photography at the Chicago Bauhaus, where, he studied with Harry Callahan and Aaron Siskin. And at the time, the Chicago Bauhaus, their photography department, had a pretty heavy-handed tradition of teaching genealogy left by, Mahori Nagi.
Mm-hmm.
And Harry Callahan was hired, years before Ishimoto started in 1948. So Ishimoto came out of this teaching of both, German-style Bauhaus photography education and also Harry Callahan's much lighter, much intuitive way of looking at the everyday, in your everyday life. So there's a kind of two teachers, who had a big impact on Ishimoto's art. When he came back to Japan, he had a quite, large impact to Japan's artistic community, not only photographers, but also architects and also designers as well. He wrote a lot of essays on education at the Bauhaus. There's a lot of architects, including Tange Kenzo, really was inspired by the way Ishimoto looked at Japanese tradition, as represented in, places like a Katsura Palace, for example. Mm-hmm. So, what's great about this exhibition at Le Bal is you're really focusing on his early years and looking at this kind of dichotomy between Japan and also Chicago, between Bauhaus way of looking at life and shapes and color, and also Harry Callahan's way of looking at the streets in Tokyo and Chicago. We both love the book Somewhere Someday. So this show, I think, does represent actually his ways of observing and expressing things he saw in Chicago and Tokyo, focusing on 50s into 60s and some 70s. Is that right?
Is that right? Perfectly right. Yeah, the idea, I think, was to show that it's very interesting that because of his own personal history, Ishimoto was a kind of in-between character, because basically, so he was born in 1921 in San Francisco from Japanese parents, and he returned to the Kochi prefecture on the Shikoku Island, and basically he was supposed to take over the farm of the parents' farm. But in 1939, he was sent back by his parents to America, to California, to finish his agricultural studies. And of course, I guess the aim was for him to not to be enrolled in the Japanese army. But after Pearl Harbor, as you know, the American people brought all the American people from Japanese origin to camps. And Ishimoto spent a few years at Amache in Colorado, in a famous camp, sadly famous camp. And in 1944, when he finally came out of the camp, he was forbidden to go either on the East Coast, either on the West Coast. And that is why it selected Chicago, but it was a very good pick because he finally get to, after a few years doing architecture studies, he went to the new Bauhaus. And Molinage died in 1946, but at the time to wish to create photography, photography training. And so Ishimoto was the first year of this photography section of the new Bauhaus. And as Yasufumi said, Callahan and Siskin were great influences. As you know, in the Bauhaus system, educational system, everybody, architects, designer, photographer, they spend 2 years, it's called the foundation course, 2 years to do lines and points and perspective and volumes and sculpture. So for 2 years, Ishimoto didn't take really a picture, and he was very frustrated by that. But at the same time, he got the visual grammar of the Bauhaus, which can really be today recognized as is a singular way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
And then the Callahan effect was that Callahan was very tired of these Bauhaus experimentations. You say, oh, Bauhaus this and Bauhaus that. No, you have to go to the street and you have to confront yourself to the irrational rhythm of the street, and everything can happen so fast,
right?
So unexpectedly. So you're not in the studio anymore. You're really, and Ishimoto is going to bring the lines, the structure, the architecture of the Bauhaus into real life.
It's well said. I think I remember one of the assignment he was given by, it was Aaron Siskin. So not during his first 2 years, later, but he was asked by Aaron to take a photograph of sky in which 90% of the picture has to be nothing and 10% can be something. So it's an exercise of visual poetry, isn't it? So he actually found the sky with electrical poles and also lights, which really gives a beautiful drawings onto the sky. And he had actually very special ways of capturing chancy moments on the street, right? From the training of this kind. I mean, there's one picture in this exhibition where he traced I guess it's like a plastic shopping bag or newspaper, perhaps. It's a flying in the air, right? He caught that moment. So, that's very much like Harry Callahan's way of looking at the world.
Yes.
So this show actually demonstrates this almost kind of bipolar aspects of his practices, but because you're looking at the first 20 to 30 years, excluding color pictures, right? So the show has a wonderful trace of how his thinking and practices change or they coexisted at the same time. He was able to take those very rigid, modernist pictures of Katsura of 1953-54. At the same time, he was looking at the people, free flow of people and phenomena in the streets. I like the structure of this exhibition very much. You have a beautiful, it's a 2 floors, at the Laval, and if you come to downstairs, there's a little shrine like space where you see
where we
a heap
are
of Katsura photographs. Even like every wall has a slightly different height, maybe. And then wall has, a little bit of sort of like a space in between. I think actually the design of this particular space comes from almost like the way Ishimoto experienced within the Katsura.
Yes.
This spatial experience he had within Katsura seems to be well translated into this particular space.
What was fascinating, or at least is fascinating for a European audience, is that Ishimoto is absolutely unknown in Europe. He had only 2 little shows, one in Arles, one in Berlin, but very limited, a long time ago. So it is the first large survey of his work. And so it's really the first introduction to his work. And we were very lucky to be able to get from the Kochi Museum 169 prints, most of them vintage prints done by Ishimoto himself. So the prints have a quality which is almost that you can rarely see in an exhibition like that, because Ishimoto really gave everything to Kochi, and you can find the best of his work with the best of his technical quality of printing. So it's a unique chance for people to understand why was Ishimoto so influential in Japan after the war. So maybe we can come back, Yasufumi, on this. When is he coming back, and why, and how, and why is it making such a big difference or influence on the artistic scene? So maybe I will tell the context, and you can explain the philosophy maybe behind it. So the context is that is the first very important person that is going outside of the Bauhaus, who is going to help him is Taiken at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's going to buy a few pictures, a beach picture, the legs picture. We're gonna bring a few pictures on screen, I suppose, and he's gonna bring that to the MoMA, to the collection, and exhibit that in 1953, so very early on. And he's going to ask Ishimoto to go back to Japan with his colleague Arthur Drexler from the architectural design department of the MoMA, because Arthur Drexler is preparing a big exhibition on Japanese traditional architecture.
It was actually that Drexler organized basically architecture in a garden. It was in a sculpture garden. He had a couple of shows there, and he really wanted to bring Japananie traditional houses to the Japanese, to the garden of Museum of Modern Art. That was one of the 2 assignments he was given, Ishimoto was given unofficially. And the other was, Steichen was actually working to organize Family of Man exhibition. So Daiken thought, I need to bring more Japanese artists in the exhibition. So can you please find some? The good things about that is Ishimoto also had a couple of pictures in that exhibition. You have one of the, Ishimoto's photographs shown in a family of man also in this exhibition.
Yes.
You know, the little girl,
the young girl
who's sort of like a
chain. Yes.
It's a very peculiar photograph, but that was also in the MoMA show. Yes.
So here is Ishimoto, who hasn't been in Japan for 14 years at the time, in 1953. He speaks a Japanese which is not exactly refined, and he discovers Katsura. And Katsura has been, since it is a jewel of traditional architecture, very much photographed in the past before Ishimoto. But what Ishimoto is going to bring is a very Mondrian type of looking. And he's going to be really looking at the traditional architecture as if it was a Barnett Newman, or as if it was an abstract piece. And of course, the people at the time, architects, you mentioned Tenge Kenzo, but also graphic designers, all kinds of people creating, are going to be fascinated by his outside view, coming directly from the Bauhaus tradition. And it is fascinating to understand that also the Bauhaus created by Walter Gropius in 1919 in Germany was very much influenced by Japan. So here you have a kind of circle in time where Japan has influenced the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus had to move to Chicago. Ishimoto had to move to America, then being trained at the Bauhaus, and comes back without being especially interested in architecture, but then make these incredible pictures of Katsura, and so brings a new, how would you say, background, or a new vision to this fabulous traditional heritage to Katsura. How would you define it?
I mean, the time Ishimoto photographed Katsura, 53, 54, kind of coincided with the timing of this discursive movement called Dento Ronso, tradition discourse. That was primarily actually discourse put together by architects and also architectural critics like Kawazoe Noboru and also Kenzo Tange, followed by numerous artists as well in visual arts, where they look at Japan's tradition to see how much of it, spirit, philosophy of forms, how much of it is relevant for contemporary productions of art and design. So they often looked at Japanese traditions, architectures, and also painting and sculptures, even like a prehistoric material such as Haniwa, Jomon Yayoi periods, actually statues, just to trace actually, if you look around the modern era, how much of it can be traced back to those traditional era. And, for particularly Kenzo Tange, looking at Ishimoto's modernist ways of looking at the 17th century structures, where the triangular roof of showing is all omitted. Ishimoto looked at, white geometric body of the showing structures. He also looked at stepping stones, in the garden, in between tea houses. They are laid out like a, modernist painting.
Or Brancusi sculpture.
Brancusi sculptures, or yes. So he really wanted to discover the modern elements in traditional architecture as photographed by Ishimoto. So that's how Ishimoto was found very relevant in this tradition discourse, boom in a way by Kenzo Tange. So the book, came out in 1960, Katsura, Tradition and Creation in Japanese Architecture, was Ishimoto's first photo book. It's not a first, second photo book, right? After Somewhere, Someplace, right? But the book was in a way hijacked by Kenzo Tange, who actually was invited by Ishimoto to write an essay for the photo book. But Tange ended up being an editor for entire book, including editing photographs. So I found the tracing of Ishimoto's, Tange's very dramatic editing of the pictures and resequencing photographs.
Cropping them sometimes.
Yes, sequencing those photographs for the book. He invited Herbert Bayer to design a beautiful cover. It's interesting, actually. Bayer also sequenced photos first, but he sequenced actually a photograph of the tea houses alphabetically. So it's a very different way of Tange wanting to see the pictures laid out. Tange really wanting to represent photograph as if actually you are there. You go through the tea houses and so I think actually Tange has to redo it, sequencing photographs. So it turned out that book really became Tange's book at the expense of Ishimoto's original vision. So anyway, it's an interesting story to tell. But what's interesting is, though, I had a lengthy conversation with Ishimoto on this, and I made a book 50 years later to talk about the collaboration between two men. But Ishimoto said, Tange's way of looking at my photograph wasn't that bad. He said, I can agree with many of the slight cleaning up and some also drastic cropping. Ishimoto kind of liked it at the end.
But also because at the time, Tange Kenzo was quite famous and Ishimoto was not famous at all in Japan. Right. And the book came out in 1960 with a Japanese publisher and an American publisher. And it was republished many times. So it's a book that all architects, Japanese architects at least, and American architects are going to know about. So suddenly Ishimoto is placed on the scene, on the artistic scene, through Tange, yes. But in a very at a very interesting space, which is not the photographic tradition or history, and suddenly is going to bump into this tradition, the photographic tradition, and say, look, it's not really about what you see, it's really about how you see. And this slight difference is going to make a bridge between the social realism, let's say, school, which was very powerful at the time, which was published all over in magazines and right. exhibited, etc. It was really the dominant mode for photography, to a completely different generation that is going to integrate this idea that it's really what you want to say about the world that that photography can provide, and not only documentary aspects. Of course, in Ishimoto, you have this bridge effect. So you have both. You have both Katsura as an object and Katsura as a vision. And that is what it's so important to show Ishimoto, because you have a kind of perfect example, like we say in French, a cas d'école, means really something which exemplify this mix between wanting to say something about the world, but also imposing through the filter of your own perception, your own maybe political vision or aesthetical vision. And suddenly the history of Japanese photography is going to be very much affected by this change. And when you look at when the French audience, at least, or the European audience, because we have a lot of European visitors, they come to the show, they cannot believe that Ishimoto in 53, which is very early on, the real glory time, glorious time of Japanese photography is more in the mid-60s. So 10 years before the big names, Ishimoto is really creating a body of work which is extremely sharp, extremely abstract in a way, almost conceptual. And so because he has been away so long, it didn't really pertain to the inheritage of, and also because he's been away during the war. So he was maybe less concerned directly by showing Japan or Tokyo after the war and the soldiers coming back home and the homeless people. He was less into that story because simply he was away for 14 years. So it's interesting that because he has been away, because he has been out of historical context, let's say, he's going to completely break the rules, or let's say the modes, the dominant modes of visual languages, but not only for photography, for all, like you said, for all the artistic scene.
Yeah.
And so people, even in France, they don't know Ishimoto, and suddenly they discover that he has been a kind of instrumental tool, bridge, or force in Japan at that time.
You know, actually, Minor White sort of like described him as a photographer who speaks actually English with the German and Japanese accents, right? German part comes from the Bauhaus training, certainly, and Japanese part, certainly, you know, that's who he was. I really see the kind of confluence of you know, inspirations and also influences in his practice. But you're right, he was really freed from ideological baggages, correct? I think he had a really kind of fresh way to look at the 17th century structure or streets in Tokyo, or things, you know, he found strange in Japanese streets. The one thing I think he was very good at was, you know, he was so good with photographing young people.
Yes, in movement.
Yes, children in movement. I think that was demonstrated in his Chicago picture, certainly. The series called The Little Ones.
Little Ones.
Right? He actually went to the south side of Chicago, you know, which is relatively rougher part of Chicago. But he was able to connect to young subject. You know, I remember he told me that because he's relatively petite, short, you know, very friendly looking. So, you know, children were not afraid of him coming to him and photographing him. Even like bathers, you know, on Lake Michigan's, you know, beaches, he was able to really capture the beautiful candid moments. And that was the case also in Tokyo, as he moved to Tokyo afterward. This exhibition has a sort of like a couple kind of movements. You know, as I said, actually, Katsura is in center, but you have a beautiful Chicago and Tokyo street pictures outside. And also you found this beautiful body work moment.
Maybe we can
talk about that a little bit. By the way, this catalog, you know, you produced, it's a beautiful, beautiful catalog. It's a great production, great essays. Yes.
Yes, we wrote a fantastic
I have a
piece
short essay in there, but
on Katsura.
Yeah, everybody has to get this book, by the way.
It's almost out of run, but we still have a few English copies. Yeah, we did it with EXB, the Atelier EXB, and it was very interesting. We selected a paper which is very bright, very 70s. But what was especially challenging is that Ishimoto's dark, the blacks in the prints are really completely stunning. And here you are.
I like the folding.
The folding pages.
It's very long. Can you explain to us this picture of legs?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming from you know, the Callahan gave an exercise to the Bauhaus student, saying you have to go and shoot beaches. So people standing or taking sun baths near the lake in Chicago. And it's fascinating in the show because you see the first picture is really a Bauhaus picture. It's a very famous picture of a woman taken from her back. And you understand that Ishimoto is laying completely on the sand, on the beach, and is doing a kind of a typical Bauhaus picture. So it's the woman is, I guess, is somewhere.
Okay.
Okay, but and then Ishimoto is going to move to do this kind of Brancusi image, where each body is like a sculpture on the beach,
Yes.
like a line. And the show is called Ishimoto Lines and Bodies, because it's really the mixture of the Bauhaus structure and of course people on the beach. But then what's incredible even more, here is the lady, here is a lady from the back. What's incredible even more is that he's going to concentrate on people attending at a counter to get maybe ice creams or drinks, and is only going to focus on their legs, like a musical partition. And of course, if you see one, it can be a documentary, so-called, whatever. But if you see many, and we show many at Le Bal, then you understand that beautiful sentence that John Cage said. He said, structure without life is dead, but life without structure is invisible. And it's exactly that, is both life and structure, they need to come together so that poetry of life is going to happen. And look at that, it's 10, 15, 20 years before photographers who are going to do that in the tradition of, in the history of photography. A picture like that, it's really amazing how abstract it is at a time where photography is not abstract or very seldom abstract.
He actually didn't crop his images. So he just kind of tightly framed,
yes,
and he photographed.
Yeah, we have this kind of absolute abstract eyes that is going to bring poetry to very simple subject. You can't see the heads, you don't see the expression of the face. So he's not focusing on trying to say something about these people. He's really trying to bring his photographic language together. That's very modern in a way. Yeah. So that's why he's one of the first modern Japanese photographer of the second half of the 20th century, and that people are going to discover at Le Bal, we hope. Let's talk just 2 minutes about Toki. Maybe you wanted to.
Yes, please do. Actually, Toki is his later work, right? I think in the 70s and 80s when.
Yeah, for over 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. So those are kind of things he found on the street, like a crashed can, right? Often, and also leaves, and the beautiful kind of trace things left on the snow, like footsteps, right?
So there is a story behind that is very interesting, that connects to the Bauhaus training he got. Is that very early on at the Bauhaus, Callan is giving him another exercise, or giving them, because it's not only for Ishimoto, but for the whole students. And it's called Evidence of Man. And so the idea is that you are going to bring a picture without really men walking in the street, for example, but it has to have a kind of evidence that someone is there or has been there. Right. And so Ishimoto is going to bring a shadow of a passerby on a wall. And so you can't see the man, but you can see his shadow. So it's an evidence of man. And then much later on, so at the end of the period of his life, he was very much influenced by the Buddhist philosophy. So he wanted to show that everything is transitory.
Right.
And the name, I don't know if I pronounce it well in Japanese, but it's Utsuroi, right. In between, or right. Transitory.
Transitory, yes.
And so he wanted to show that everything created by man, like how do you call canette, like what you drink with, sorry, okay. Cans, yes. Can disappear. Yes. And also the leaves, every year they disappear, they fall from the tree. But how do you show that man is only a transitory idea or object? So he's going to show the steps in the snow, like an evidence of man.
Right.
So you see, all this Bauhaus exercise have been extremely important for him during all his life and his work, because you understand that it's a mixture of Buddhist philosophy that he got when he was back in Japan,
Right.
but also the idea that in order to convey an idea, you have to find the proper trick, visual trick, so that it's not only about what you see, but it's about the idea that you want to convey.
What has been there? One may have been there.
Yes, exactly.
So
exactly.
yeah, he was very good at that, doing these things. Maybe I can just ask you about his really early pictures. The things I guess I saw for the first time, in this exhibition are his experimental work from like late 40s, right?
The foundation course.
Foundation course, right? So when you go to Kochi Museum, actually, I have not done research there. My exhibition I did at the Museum of Science Houston in 2010 was organized before all the pictures, I think, went to Kochi. So how those early materials are categorized and made available at the archive?
So during the foundation course, Ishimoto and all the students of the Bauhaus were using several techniques. So you have solarization, multiple exposures, you have prints that are done without shooting, just as a lab work, just using the light effect on the paper. Photographs, yes. Exactly. And also collage, using both pictures and things taken, cut in magazines, so cutting. So you can see when you look at the objects at Le Bal that what Molinage wanted to say is that experimenting through photography was the future of photography. That's what he thought. So they are really experimenting through light, through using all these tricks, technical tricks and beautiful tricks with photography. And that's when you get to Kochi, you have all these boxes with a few vintages, because the truth is that Ishimoto was printing himself in the lab of the Bauhaus, and so only remains maybe one print of each one of them. So we couldn't do a very extensive presentation of that period, but still you totally understand that he was trained, almost structured with lines, points, volume, perspective, a square, all these geometrical abstract elements, which are going to appear during all his life in his photography, maybe in a conscious way or unconscious way. And I must say that because we were talking about Toki about this period of experimental period of his Bauhaus years, at the very, very end of the exhibition, we show a series called Flow of People that has been shot in Shibuya, and is not looking in the visor, is not looking in through his camera, is really taking the pictures by the hand. So he's really a master of space, because you can imagine that the pictures are not reframed, they are not cropped afterwards. So it means he knows exactly where to place his camera to get the proper frame. And also he wants the people in Shibuya to appear blurred. Blurred on the picture, but not too blurred, because if they are too blurred, you can't see them. But blurred, because otherwise this idea of being transitory you cannot convey. So imagine, he's totally a master of space and time in order to bring this idea of the man as a kind of ephemeral,
in transit.
In transit. It's really beautiful. And maybe one last thing, I was very much impressed when Ishimoto was celebrated in Japan a few years ago, because it was a centennial of his birth. So a few museums, including the Kochi Museum of Art, did extensive shows in Japan. Arata Isozaki Arata, who used to be, I think, an architect who was trained by Kenzo Kenzo. He said this beautiful thing. He said, "No Gushi and Ishimoto were the first ones to see Japan with an abstract eye. It's extraordinary that it is an architect who is saying that. And he's going to add this unbelievable thing. He says, both Noguchi in sculpture and Ishimoto in photography are going to create a form for Japan, or give Japan a form. Can you imagine today, I don't know, Herzog and de Meuron or Porzenpark or Frank Gehry paying tribute to a photographer because he has given a shape to a whole cultural heritage of a country? It's amazing. I think it was an amazing
it's interesting
statement.
Actually. I mean, the Isozaki certainly, knew both Ishimoto and Noguchi, Isamu Noguchi well, but two Japanese American artists actually really, they were not friends. It's not that they met a lot.
No.
They were sort of like almost independent from each other. And interesting enough, that connecting two of them was certainly Kenzo Tange, who was close to both of them. Particularly, early years of Ishimoto, Tange was close to him. But I have to say, the shapes Arata Isozaki meant is really the shapes of how traditional elements and also forms were relevant in contemporary creation of Japanese architecture and city in a post-war context. I think that really comes from Ishimoto's way of looking at the Katsura.
Yes.
This was such an influential body, particularly to architects for many years to come. As a matter of fact, when I had a conversation with a Japanese architect, Toyo Ito, who was actually generation younger than Isozaki, Ito mentioned that too, the importance of the way Ishimoto captured the tradition, I think was so important to him as an architect as well. This show is going to really revive Ishimoto in a contemporary dialogue, particularly in the European context. And I hope actually, his ways of looking will be shared for many years in Europe and hopefully North America as well. In Japan, I think he has established his reputation and vision, but still, I think, we as a, curatorial professions, I think we ought to, reviving him, presenting him in a new context. So I think from that perspective, I think this show was such a success. Is this show going somewhere, traveling to other institutions?
In fact, it's not really possible because since we are only showing vintage prints,
I see.
And they're going to be for many months in Paris, they have to rest. So
they have to go back.
They have to go back in boxes, and they have to go back to their Eden status.
Yes.
And so it's a great opportunity because everybody coming to Paris Plus Art Basel or everybody coming to Paris Photo this year will be able to see the show and this unique selection of vintage prints done by Ishimoto. So yeah, I think I hope they're gonna rush. We're gonna have a few debates and also lectures.
A show will be available until November.
Yeah, until end of November.
End of November. So
and we have a lot of foreigners coming, and there are the great feedback we get from them is that they didn't expect a totally unknown for them figure to be so important, decisive in the history of Japanese visual art. There is a kind of, miracle that is happening in the show, that suddenly they understand so much more about the provocateurs, about architecture, about this very important notion that you have in Japan of
space,
means the space, the transition space, and and Ishimoto is going to bring everything together in these few prints that are shown at Le Bal and in the book. And I think it's a revelation for people. It certainly is.
Great. Hopefully many of you will come see the show.
Yes, we're waiting for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.